Hello, everyone. Again, we're talking about the
Uh,
CISO and risk management track tonight. We have already started the discussions, but we forgot to start recording, so you missed some very good discussions. But let's continue. So we were talking about risk budgeting, which is a concept that we're talking about right now.
Yeah. So the point I was kind of making is that I think this is the kind of topic that the summit can really help. But the place where the summit really can make a difference is to bring the multiple disciplines to the table, right? So if you look at risk budget, it's a good example that we really want to have a good conversation and a good set of examples being put forward to, risk professionals, CISOs, CEOs, executives, CFOs, members of the finance teams, security engineers, developers, and make sure that there's a common language that makes sense all the way from somebody who's actually doing something and, an executive making a decision. And budgets, I think, fit really well with, I think, something that we have to do in security, which is we need to translate our world into something that the business understands. And everybody in business understands budgets.
I'm not sure everyone in the business understands budgets.
Well, they should.
well,
I think a very limited number of people in the business actually understand budget. And a lot of people think they do.
Well,
I think everybody understands the importance of it, but where it gets more challenging, I think, particularly for ourselves, is when we're putting a business case together, which is often about what value the business is going to derive from giving us a budget. And that's where there's a challenge. And I think that's one of the areas where we need to lead the discussion.
And it goes into OPEX and CAPEX.
Correct. Yeah, don't even get into asset depreciation, but absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, asset depreciation of security risk.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a title there.
Yeah, don't do it.
It's a 2-hour session.
Look,
this
is where I get uncomfortable.
Stuff, man. Like that's, I remember having EBITDA and freaking CapEx and OPEX conversations, right? It's what happens, right? Or when you want to drive change, especially when you want to put some requirements on some teams, the more you can frame it like that, the more you're speaking their language.
No, yeah, absolutely. It's one of those areas I've become more and more embroiled in as the years have gone by, and it probably for me really started when I picked up my first commercial CSO gig, because I was reporting to the CFO. But yeah, I can wax lyrical on the subject, unfortunately, but mostly with the pitfalls.
So I think what will be worthwhile doing between now and the summit, right, is, and I actually think we try to have a couple of sessions on this. And this is what I did, that I was saying that we need now to explore, early next week, maybe this is a good topic on Doodle, on one of the other ones, so we can find a couple of slots that, the key individuals can participate, whether on a Monday, on a Tuesday, or a Thursday. So, because I think this is one of those that we need to do some work before the summit.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you arrive at the summit and have a conversation that starts like where we are now, it's not going to go very far, right?
No.
In fact,
yeah, agreed. If there's one subject that actually needs a bit of rigor and process to it, I would suggest it's this one.
Correct. And I think, look, the bottom line is that this is big enough that we could even do a day, right, on risk budget, right? Like, this is where that depends on the level of interest, depends on, where we're going, because, you like, one of the things that Simon Worley talks about, which very few individuals get to, is about the value mapping, when you actually, literally do a map around the value chains and the costs, and actually, guess what? The budgets, right? So you can actually do a map where you can start to track the budget costs and the maturity levels that you've got, and where, in a way, you can even say where you're spending money versus where you're not spending money.
And what are you getting for that money? Sorry, it's what's the value return from the spend on that particular set of controls, and could you spend that money better somewhere else? That
Correct.
I think is where I've got the questions, but I'm certainly open to answers because I haven't seen anybody nail it yet.
So one of the maps that I did once that completely blew my mind was I did a map that I if you imagine the worldly maps where you go from less mature to more maturity, and what I mapped was the systems that we had. Basically, this calls that system, calls that system, calls that system, and I just categorized them based on how fast could they fix a vulnerability, right? And it was a very simple question, right? Is it a 2-hour thing? Is it a day? Is it a week? Or is it a weekend, right? So it was basically saying, shit hits the fan, right? You have a massive vulnerability. You have to fix it, right? And there's systems that they can push in 2 hours. Maybe some might even be able to do it in a day, cowboy style. Others, doesn't matter if the CEO is on their throat, is not going to go to production in less than 3 or 4 days, just because that's what it takes. And there's systems that you can't even do it, right? Like we had systems that we didn't have the source code for it, right? We couldn't freaking patch that thing. And what was really fascinating was when we then did that mapping. So we start to see these very interesting clusters. And then we see where we were spending a lot of our efforts in security. And can you guess where we were spending a lot of our efforts and budgets?
Technology.
Were you on the ones that can fix very fast, on the ones that we can fix very slow?
Probably the latter.
What, the slow or the fast?
Well, so sorry, yeah, good point. You're probably spending it on the quick, but you needed to spend it on the slow.
Exactly. And what was very interesting, and you know why? Because by definition, the systems that can fix quickly have good teams. They do DevOps. They push to production very quickly. They embrace security. They control their system. The more you go to those on the edge of they can't patch or they don't have good systems, security just becomes another one of gigantic bugs that they have. They also are trying to address. If you even have a team that knows how to do it. And then what was very interesting, I then added another question was, what is the damage that can be done on that window of opportunity, right? So basically say, how much damage can be done in 2 hours? How much damage can be done in a day? How much damage can be done, in a week or, if it goes forever, right? And it was, again, very interesting that the results were not what you would think of. And then what that showed me was that we were investing in the wrong areas. We were, for example, putting efforts in places that if there was a massive problem, the teams could fix it very quickly, and B, the impact would be minimal within that period. Where there's other systems that we actually should be looking at a lot more mitigations and thinking about how to improve it, because if we got hit there, it would be a much bigger problem.
So if you look at it could tie well into the risk velocity. So the speed that risk might materialize. So then you can make your prioritization easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you have to remember that, most attacks, they're not science fiction attacks, right? It's not like they do one hit wonder and disappear, right? They will do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 20 things. The problem is most of the times we're not paying attention, right? Or we don't have enough visibility into those early warning signs. So I think we need to do some preparation work on this, come up with a couple of models, and then even see who can we invite for those sessions so we can get a consensus on how to apply this and what should happen next.
So are we going to have them this week?
No, next week, realistically, right?
Next week, okay.
Yeah. I think what we need to do is do a doodle poll around the participants, or even the individuals that are registered, and say, which hour fits better everybody, so we can do an hour just on this and start to explore this concept. Because again, on Twitter, there's only so much we can say on Twitter.
So who am I reaching out to?
Just before, I think if we do want to discuss more about SLOs and error budgets and all that we talk about on Twitter, it's worth spending some time also exploring the original idea and make sure we all understand, we all agree on the same concept that we're understanding before trying to applying to AppSec and risk management and all that. Because from the Twitter thread and also from the conversation now, I think not all of us understand vulnerability budget or risk budget in the same way. So maybe also worth spending some time for that. I think it should be part of the summit, so that everyone that will be in the session have good understanding of what we're talking about.
Sorry, Omar, I think I'd agree with that. Can I suggest we reverse engineer it? By which I mean we agree on what the outputs are going to be from the session, and therefore work out what the inputs and the discussion needs to be. But I think if we output base it, that will allow us to frame the discussion.
Yep.
I think for output, this was one of my concerns on Twitter. I feel it's a bit too early for me to say if I have an output, because right now it's just an idea I had and I wanted to see what other thinking is about. And this is something we're playing with right now at SNCC, but I cannot say that it's working or how it was accepted or that it's fundamentally changed how we do application security. So I think I would be a bit careful about the outcome, because the best outcome I could imagine is a bit better definition of the theorem. That's something that we all agree that is interesting and worth trying.
Is a useful output a glossary?
Again, sorry?
Is a useful output of something, an early session at least, a glossary of what these terms mean to everyone? An agreed definition of what they mean, what they are?
Yeah, this is something we can do. This is what I said, we could better define the theory, and something that we should all be happy with.
Yeah, but what you described there was an outcome, right?
Yeah,
I
think
that is an output. That's a document that can come out of it.
Yes.
So
and it's a useful one.
This. I actually think that the way to do this is you should really want to piggyback on the SRE concept, because there's a good foundation. So this is what my team done, which is really cool, right? And this is all on there's one of the platforms. We also now run our engineering on this, but it's a really cool way to publish this information. And you can see that it contains all the definitions, the policies, how we're thinking about this, right? So they're now doing Failure Friday, which is really cool. But you can see that this contains those definitions. And I think it's really powerful to even create something like this, right? Because it allows you to start to create that description, right, of what we are doing. And this is a GitHub repo. We share information, right? You put stuff on it. You can do other things, right? And it becomes a great sort of knowledge base for it, right?
Yeah, I can take the blog that I started and convert it to a repository.
Yeah.
Because some of the terms are already there. I already defined all the SRI, SROs, and all that.
Correct.
It will be okay if it will be on my GitHub repository, or we can put it on OWASP, I guess.
Yeah.
I think I start with mine because it will be the fastest.
Sure.
Yeah, and Jens, if I may, though, let's not reinvent the wheels. Certainly the financial terms are already, I would suggest, pretty well defined, and they're not ours. They're accounting stroke finance terms. So let's use those. Annualized loss expectancy, depreciation of assets. That there must be, he says, without knowing where they are. But I can ask my other half. There must be glossary or agreed definitions somewhere in the accounting practices handbook or something.
So this was done using.
I think this is some of the confusion, because at least me, I don't feel there is something for finance here, because budget is not about finance; it's more about time.
No,
it's a time budget,
so
not a money budget.
Oba, forgive me. That's where I would perhaps vehemently disagree. To get your budget, you have to talk to the finance people. You have to convince the CFO that it's going to be a good investment by him or her into your area. So you do, certainly in my experience, I had to learn finance for non-finance people. I think was the name of the course.
Yeah.
But
Omer, remember also, right, that in a way, the power of these ideas is that, you won't control the way it goes, right? Like, in a way, every new entity that we bring to the mix will bring their own variation. And that's the beauty of it. The beauty of it is that we want a language that allows us to go from, you know, how many unpatched things I have over there to how many am I comfortable having it, right? And that's what this allows. This allows a conversation that, you know, addresses risk individuals, addresses developers, addresses managers, address finance, addresses CISOs, and it becomes that kind of another piece of the puzzle, right? It's not the piece of the puzzle, it's another piece of the puzzle, combined with risk, combined with, you know, all sorts of other activities.
And it's also, you know, if I may, Denise, it's to the principle of what we're trying to do here is the power of collective thought.
Yep.
And remembering that actually it is the collective. You know, we can't fix this in the security pillar without engaging with the IT team and the finance team and the business operations.
And it's also worth having someone from SRE. I see that Patrick joined us. Hey,
yep.
Patrick. So it's good that he's here.
I wanted to add to that, like, it just happens that I did research on this stuff, like yesterday, like Omar didn't know, but so there are very similar concepts. You know, the SLO is one approach, but there's a concept called technical lag, which is basically also related. Like, how long does it take you to update stuff? So that's the same thing. A dependency drift calculation, it's not a concept that have been like used. And then on a project level, there's the concept of the cost of delay for prioritizing stuff like with risk on a backlog. So unless you want to specifically focus on the SLO as the SRE variant of security, there's several models that kind of like go around and break this open to either a project side or more dev focus instead of like staying security and ops and kind of trying to translate that. So I wonder if that's useful to discuss it as well, or that you want to jump in immediately to the SLO SRE discussion, say, well, you know, that's it. So.
Cool. So which day next week? Oh, that we will do that on Doodle, but I need to know who I'm inviting to the Doodle.
Well, I think you'll invite the registrants, the individuals that register for this session, right? Because they are the ones who are interested.
40 people.
Well, you know, and then 10 will turn up, right?
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say, you know, give them an option and we go with the majority. And as you say, see who turns up on the day.
Okay.
But Phil, what was that amazing research that I remember you pointing me to, where the guy was seeing already risk from the Monte Carlo models, the statistic analysis? Remember
Douglas Hubbard.
Yeah, is it that one?
Yeah,
there's
Douglas
plenty of it
Hubbard.
kicking around.
How to measure anything? How to measure anything in cybersecurity risk?
Yeah,
quite a good book.
So I think there's a more basic conversation. I've come in late to this, obviously. I still think there's a more basic conversation around the budget and whether or not you're actually talking about risk or talking about something else. And my suspicion is you're talking at something which is one step removed from risk, a driving factor of risk rather than risk itself. But I think this is a conversation probably best for when we focus on it.
Cool. But I definitely feel that this is one that is worth us allocating time and seeing, you know, what can we then do in the summit to move the needle, especially because I think it's worthwhile also, you know, and this is again an interesting point of view, right? It might be worthwhile doing a session that has the practitioners actually involved, right? Because here's the bottom line, right? It doesn't matter what we create. If I can't get my team in security and my developers to embrace it, it's not going to happen. It's like it is that simple, right? So I think it'd be quite interesting to pick up specific use cases and say, can we address that and that and that use case, which these individuals are going to, you know, security champions, you know, security professionals, developers, you know, heads of teams, you know, they are the ones who are going to have to adopt it.
Can I just ask something quickly? Yeah. What's everyone's definition of risk? in the current meeting?
Oh, that's going to be... You're going to get
another
10
session.
definitions.
Something that might go wrong.
Well,
but this is definitely a different session. But Denise, I think
So some risks are good risks. Sorry, so apologies, Omar, cutting across. Didar, some risks are good risks.
They're called opportunities.
Yeah.
There's still risks.
Yeah, I want to call them opportunities.
But that's why I take the view that you have to accept the risk, right? Because there's always a risk. The question is whether, the key question is, I go back to this chart that Phil drew to me once, which I think is amazing, is if a risk is above your risk thresholds, you are putting the business in danger. If the risk is below the risk threshold and you enforce it, you actually are slowing down the business.
Yeah. And sometimes, forgive me, but sometimes it's not about accepting the risk. Sometimes it's about taking the risk.
Exactly. Look, you want to see a great example is the fintech banks, how they open accounts and the risk threshold that they have versus the high street things. And I remember trying to open a business account with Metro, and they wanted me to spend 2 hours on it. I was like, "Whoa, am I going to play chess with you?" It's like, what? It's like, what do you want to do with me for 2 or 4 hours, right?
Just out of interest, is anyone here from a fintech?
I was, and then I decided they were taking too much risk.
So the fintechs, all their customers are crap, and the moment they pull into full regulation, that most of their customers
they're going to collapse. Yeah, they can't do banking licenses. It's e-money only.
They're taking risks to bring on customers that the regulator will not let them keep when they go for full regulation.
I'd go with that, Phil. Unfortunately, that's why my business account is with Starling, not with Revolut.
Revolut owe me money. So the definitions of risk and all the rest of it, you know, we've had 20, 30 years of security trying to redefine something that the risk application has already defined to some degree. There's a body of academic work which isn't complete about this, but I still think what you're talking about in terms of component level budgets for events is probably at a level of granularity where you're talking about factors, things that if you have more of, you have more risk, or less of, you have less risk, but they're not directly the risk themselves, which is what I think this is very similar to the metrics measurement conversation. You measure factors, you estimate risk. Your risk estimation is informed by your measurement, but you don't measure your risk directly. You measure it indirectly through the things in your, you know, how many vulnerabilities have we got? How many systems have we got exposed to the net? How many users have we got?
Or to look at it from the other direction, I'm not talking about risk. I'm going to say that the less vulnerabilities I'm going to have, the less risk I'm going to have. I don't know what risk is. Yeah. But
absolutely true. And that's because your number of vulnerabilities is a factor in how much risk you have. It's a risk factor. Yeah. And I absolutely, what we're talking about are budgets for risk factors. Which risk factors do we think matter, and what should they look like?
Mm-hmm. So I think this was a really good suggestion, that the outcome will be a repository like what you showed. And maybe this is something we can even work on as part of the summit. Like have a starting one and each one taking one other page or something like that.
Who could take that task? Can you create that repo?
I can take that.
Because I think that even if the first major movement is just to collect a lot of best concepts and practices, so that, like, again, we don't reinvent the wheel, I think it's very important, right? You know, and we have the SRE crowd, we have the risk crowd, we have the finance crowd, you know, we have the development crowd, right? Look, I've seen risk boards for shipping a product, right? You know, every company has a risk board, right? So this fits into that model. Cool. So let's explore that, because I think this is a worthwhile topic. And then, you know, if we can do a couple more sessions before now, and then we have a better idea of what we can achieve at the summit.
Cool. So I suggest we go back to the summit schedule for the CISO and risk management tracks to see what we already have put in place and see if there are any items that don't have a moderator.
Actually, what we don't have is worth talking to is we actually don't have any, I think, risk training sessions.
Yeah, we don't.
And I'm sorry I was late, but Phil, did you talk about risk valuation and how you model that?
Not yet. I was late as well.
Oh, good. Because I think that's, I mean, we had that session last year, which was quite, it got quite good. I think it's trying to get some, because again, we're talking here about quantities, but I think quantifying risk in the way that a financial organization would in terms of their hedging risk or their actuarial risk for an insurer. I think cybersecurity is often represented as green, green, amber, red, and there should be a dollar value on it. Otherwise, how do you get a budget against it? So some of the things we talked about last year, Phil, I think it's probably worth having a session on that.
Yep. I'm going to end up with a lot of sessions.
So if we had a training session, would it create value, or is it more valuable to have? So when we did that risk stuff last year, we covered everything in the session. So people who are not even from the risk management practice, they were able to contribute because we had an overview. And it's risk management is not rocket science if there are so many different terminologies, but it can be explained more easily than some of the other technical subjects.
So the way I described it yesterday, I think, was that there's largely a technical audience at this summit, but there were some business refugees in the session we had on risk, and I think it's good to have a track that those business people can contribute to if they're coming along.
Yep.
Is that for the actual summit or for training sessions?
For the summit.
Yeah.
As an ex-technical person who's gone more business, I completely agree with having stuff business people can contribute to.
Yeah.
Cool. And so that would probably be here Thursday morning. We have a gap in the risk management track. What are we calling it?
You see, so I think, I think what we probably need to do is for now that we got these sessions that start to get some good traction, right? I think we need to start to view them in isolation, right? Where, for example, this team here really only cares about risk and maybe a bit of mapping, right? Because, if you look at it, again, like the sense of gravity for everybody, for example, on this call is clearly on, CISO related topics, risk related topics. And we want to have sessions that are very valuable for that. And then, probably Worldly Maps is probably the one that has the highest conflicts on that one. But apart from that, the other sessions are going to be much more technical. So we should be looking at those.
I think maybe if you look at the overlap with a basic threat modeling and a basic cloud security one, you want people to be able to go and get the basics done, maybe not do the 3 chili sessions, but do the 1 chili session, and then step into the risk management, 3 chili sessions.
Yeah. I couldn't quite catch that.
So what I was saying, that if you think of a business person coming along, they probably want to step outside of their comfort zone and challenge themselves a bit with threat modeling or cloud. But so you want some basic sessions they could go to on that, and then switch tracks into the risk management where they can contribute. So there's kind of learning and contributing. And I think if you think about from a business person coming to these tracks, you want to make sure there aren't clashes so that they can learn something as well as being just kind of in the echo chamber of risk.
Okay, so if I was a business person, I probably will start with Worldly Maps on Monday, do some Worldly Map sessions, then on Wednesday, or threat modeling. Where is threat modeling? Threat modeling.
But I was going to suggest that maybe people can also learn something they're not necessarily comfortable with. They can do a basic session in that.
I know, but the basic sessions are in the training week for threat modeling, for example, so they can still.
But remember, like, no, the beauty of this is that the individuals can make their own schedule, right? So I think that's the beauty of this thing, right? What we have to make sure is that we have sessions that maximize the talent on it, right? So, for example, like I think you'll be really good to try to and I know it starts OIRS something. You need to come up with a better name for that, man.
I'm going to keep it just to annoy you.
I'll come up with a nice logo so I can just remember the logo person, the mascot. Because I think that, you know, if you look at it, for example, okay, risk budgets, I think is something that has a lot of mileage. The stuff that Phil pushed out has a massive intersection with what's it called, testing, with, you know, TDD, right? So BDD, sorry, behavioral, you know, the whole the description testing, right? Because, you know, the whole, you know, when I do this, then I do that, then I do this, and I do that, right? There's a whole range of really good experiences in writing that for development, right? In writing that for applications. So if you look at a mature development team, they would have those things in place. And that's where we want also to put our security stories. In fact, they already have that. If you look at when a good developer team does, for example, an authentication system, they will actually write something like that. You know, we'll do security because of that. You know, we have to do this, or the password reset has to have these things, right? So I think that is a very valuable. And then you add the other big area, which is the one that Ben was driving, which is the intersection between all the different elements of the multiple standards. And those are, I think, really great sense of gravity for us to address.
Okay.
Thoughts?
Yeah, the only other thing I'd comment is that I think also to make the Wardley mapping link in with the risk. I mean, maybe we can get one of the Wardley mapping sessions to talk about the risk side of things, because if you look at what Simon talks about, he's always going on about these decision loops and what you do is to actually look at.
We have one. We have threat mapping, and we also have risk mapping here, applying risk overlay with maps and security decision making.
Yeah.
Great. So as long as that isn't a clash with the risk strand, then that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing, again, so from a schedule point of view, it tends to work out. So don't worry too much about it. You know, eventually what you do is, you know, and trust me, I've done several of these, right, is, you know, what we do is you then look at the key sessions, you look at the key individuals, you look at the cadence, and you kind of juggle them around a bit, right? And it's never perfect, but you know, you get a nice flow. But the thing that we should be thinking also, and for you guys on the call, right, we should start to think about what materials we can bring and what ideas for them. If you look at Simon and the Worldly Maps community, you know, we're going to have a good session, of course, because Simon can talk about these topics. But if we can bring our materials to that session and say, what about this? We're thinking like this. How does it work, etc. I think it's going to be a lot more productive and a lot more interesting because he can bounce off those ideas.
You know, what's great about Simon's, he's done so much real mapping. You can present what you think is the map for the subject, and he will correct you, and that's incredibly valuable.
Well, and the reality is, if you look at the topics we're talking about here, we should be creating a map for them, right? Because we should be understanding what are the points that are weak and what should we be focusing on, right?
Yeah.
Good example of the power of maps to move the needle. So we should be able to say, we want the summit to move this from here to here, right? Because that's currently the gap that it is.
Yeah.
The same way that Simon did a map on mapping, right? We should do a map on these things.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to start to put this now on the main Hey Summit. So then if you guys can start to register, it'll be great, right? So we can measure the pulse, and also you start to see who should bring involved to these conversations. I think that would be quite amazing.
Thanks, Dennis.
Cool.
So,
so actually, Alan, you know, on the whole club CISO, I haven't reached out a lot to those guys, but you know, how can we get them involved, right? Because they also have a pretty good network, and there's a lot of good stuff also happening there.
I suspect the easiest way is just to ask them. but perhaps pick off some most likely candidates. So, yeah, for the CISO and risk management, fairly high up my list would be Shan and Kevin Fielder.
Yeah.
I reached out to Kevin already.
Yeah, I was going to say, you said he was interested.
But I suspect Simon Legg would be useful as well.
Are you
I don't know
contact them?
Simon so well, but I'm just judging that based on his contributions.
So if you already know these people, other than Kevin, would you mind contacting them? It would be better if it comes from you as a participant and a contributor and part of the community.
Yep, quite happy to.
Cool. All right, so I think we have, a first pass at this, and so
Netflix party. Sorry.
So we still have to agree on the movie. It might be Princess Bride or a variation of it.
The summit tradition.
Sneakers.
I'm still going with that Dark Star.
Oh yeah,
Sneakers is good. Robert.
And so,
although
how about,
since it's AppSec, why not antitrust?
Did anyone watch it?
Antitrust?
I haven't seen it.
What is that?
Antitrust is worth a watch. It's probably not quite right for this, but it is worth a watch.
What is it a movie?
Oh yeah.
On the CISO side, also a mate of mine has just become the head of security of SNCC.
Hello?
Who? Sorry, we lost you.
You went on mute, Tony.
So, no, Simon. So yeah, a mate of mine has just become head of security of SNCC, so I could get him involved as well.
Yeah, well, Omer, that was here. He works there too, right? And I know what's his name?
Be his boss then.
Yeah, yeah, Gaipo. You know Gaipo, right? He's the CTO.
No, I don't know. My mate Tom just went there.
Yeah, look, they are a great example of it. They should be heavily involved, right? Because if you look at it, right, they're trying to solve the dependency management problem, right? And that is all about risk. How many vulnerabilities you accept, how many issues you patch, how many things you don't patch, etc. Right? It's all about risk management. So cool. All right. Any other final comments in the last 2 minutes?
And if anyone's not on Slack, just let me know. I'll send you the link.
Thanks. And actually, if you know anybody who's furloughed, right, and wants to, take their career to the next level and want to help, right, point them our way.
Oh, that's a good thought. Rob Newby on Club CISO. I'll reach out to Rob as well.
Cool.
Thank you.
Jess, we should get her involved.
I think she's a little busy, but yes, I'd agree with that in terms of value, but I'm just aware she's a little busy.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for your time. Another really good session. Some really cool conversations and topics. And I'll see you next week, or when we do our doodle or whatever system we use to figure out the best time to meet up.
Cheers, guys.
Yeah.
See ya.